Japan has a debt of $10 trillion and a GDP of $4.3 trillion in 2023. Their debt to GDP ratio is around 250%. Every other major economy has a debt to GDP ratio less than 100% or just over 100%. There are two major reasons for such a high debt to GDP ratio. First is that the Japanese GDP did not grow a bit since 1993. In 1993 the Japanese GDP was $4.5 trillion. In 2023 it is still the same. American GDP tripled in that period, and British and French GDP doubled. GDP growth matters because if say a GDP grows 100% and a country has a debt to GDP ratio of 60% and a fiscal deficit is an average of 3.3% every year, the debt to GDP ratio of a country will remain unchanged at 60%. This happens because 100% growth in GDP cancels out 100% growth in debt. Now imagine a country whose GDP doesn't grow a bit in 30 years and has a deficit of 4% per year. After 30 years you'll find that it has a debt to GDP ratio of 180%, 120% for the newly added debt and 60% for previous debt. There are two reasons that the Japanese GDP didn't grow. First is the Plaza Accord, an agreement it signed with the US government to appreciate the Japanese yen with respect to US dollars in 1985. Germany, France, and the UK signed the agreement too. Their currency appreciated at the same rate too, but they didn't face the second challenge. The second challenge Japan faced was the asset price bubble, where the interest rate became so low that the Japanese started buying real estate, stocks, and anything they can get their hands on, and it appreciated the yen even further. As a result, the 55% to 60% GDP growth Japan could have achieved in the last 30 years from 1993 to 2023 was zero due to the overvaluation of the Japanese yen. Japan has a higher deficit than other G7 countries like UK and France because Japan is hesitant to increase taxes. Its tax to GDP ratio is in the range of 30 to 35%, while expenditure to GDP ratio is 35 to 42%. It has social security program along with universal health care. It also spends annually on infrastructure. This all adds up. Social security payments increased 3 times since 1990 and now are a major chunk of government expenditure. They didn't even have a significant consumption tax till 1997. Only after 1997, the consumption tax was increased to 5% and now it is 10%. UK, France, and Germany had this tax since World War II. Some arguments on the internet tend to downplay the realness of $10 trillion in debt. The fact that Japanese debt is held by Japanese people is true but is irrelevant. American people own almost all of the American debt. A big economy like Japan will hold its debt as nobody else has spare $10 trillion to hold an investment that pays 0.5% interest per year. If the Japanese government prints more money to pay off the debt, the purchasing power of the yen decreases. Another argument is that if the Bank of Japan owns 50% of Japanese debt, it cancels out the debt as it is owed by the Japanese government and owned by the central bank, which is a proxy of the government of Japan. Bank of Japan didn't own the Japanese debt till 2013. Till 2013 the debt was already over 200% of the GDP. Only in 2013, under the Shinzo Abe administration, the ownership of Japanese debt by their central government reached 13% of total government debt. Buying of government debt by the Central Bank of Japan is a recent event. As of 2023, it owns around 45% of the total government debt. The debt is real. The real problem of holding so much debt is it erodes the creditworthiness of the Japanese government.